Okay, folks, today we'll be talking about proteins and their function. And this material is important because we have to understand how proteins work before we can understand how drugs work, since most drugs target, you guessed right, proteins. So we'll talk about proteins, and then we'll talk about 3 different classes of protein that do 3 different functions. Let's start with a refresher about what proteins are. So proteins are made of small chemicals called amino acids. And these amino acids have a specific number and order for each protein. Some proteins are small, some proteins are huge, and the sequence of amino acids matters. Proteins are the major workhorse of the body, so they perform the chemical functions, the mechanical functions, the signaling functions, the transportation functions of the cell. And they are the primary target of drugs, which is why we need to talk a little bit more about it. Before we jump into the various types of proteins, I want to give you just some more examples of what proteins can do. Let's start with one of my favorite proteins, hemoglobin. So the structure of hemoglobin is shown to you here on the right. It's basically a glob. But hemoglobin is cool because this one large protein is actually made up of 4 smaller proteins that come together. What does hemoglobin do? Well, you've probably already heard of this protein before coming to class because it is responsible from grabbing oxygen in your lungs and shipping it all over your body to provide your organs oxygen, to provide your muscles oxygen, to provide your brain oxygen. Thank goodness, right? And it is the reason your blood is red. And a little bit of a secret here. That's because there's iron in hemoglobin. So this protein also contains the element iron, which is super cool, and also why it can bind to oxygen. So there's an example of one protein. Here's another example of a protein that has a wildly different function. This protein is called kinesin. And its job, as you can kind of see on the right here, is to carry cargo around the cell. So this kinesin molecule physically walks down this strand, carrying its cargo, so this cargo can move around the cell. It looks like walking legs, and I am going to get us to this other screen here so we can watch it walk. It's pretty cool. Okay, so here's the kinesin protein. You can see its little legs walking back and forth. And you can see that as it's walking, it's kind of moving its way along this rod, carrying its cargo along. And so if you were able to see inside of your cells, you would see this happening, which is pretty darn cool, right? The last example of a protein with a function that I'll talk about today is called actin. Actin, in this picture here, it is the kind of green coloring that you can see. These kind of green rods almost that you can see in this picture. So these are 2 cells. The nucleus is this blue bit. And then the green kind of strings, that's the actin. And so actin plays a structural role. It acts like scaffolding within your cells so that they're not too smushy, for example, so that they have some structural integrity. Actin plays a really important role in our inner ear in supporting the hearing structures inside of our ears. So it's pretty cool. That wraps up some various examples of proteins in our bodies, and let's move to the 3 major types of proteins that we'll discuss in this class, since they are important for understanding how drugs work.